Imagine you're 15 years old. You create a fake MySpace page mocking your school's assistant principal. It's a stupid, childish prank. Is it illegal? That's debatable. What isn't debatable, however, is that you don't deserve to be handcuffed, dragged before a judge, and sentenced to 3 months in a juvenile detention center. But in 2007, that is precisely what happened to a teenager named Hillary Transue. And she was far from alone. Between 2003 and 2008, in a corner of Pennsylvania, one judge sent over 2,000 children for profit detention centers. These were kids as young as 10 years old, sentenced for offenses as minor as trespassing in a vacant building, cursing at their parents, or shoplifting a DVD. The reason behind this assembly line of injustice was simple and sickening. The judge was getting paid. He and a judicial colleague received $2.8 million in kickbacks from the very prisons that would house these children. This is the story of the kids for cash scandal. And if it doesn't make your blood boil, nothing will. The system before the fall. To understand how such a monstrous betrayal of trust could occur, we must go back to Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, in the early 2000s. This is coal country, a region that has seen better days. Towns like Wilkes-Barre have been struggling economically since the mining industry collapsed decades ago, leaving behind a community searching for stability and order. At the center of this community stood the Luzerne County Courthouse, where justice was supposed to be served. For the juvenile court system, that justice was in the hands of one man, Judge Mark Ciavarella. Appointed to the bench in 1996, Ciavarella cultivated a public image as a respected, no-nonsense figure. He was known for being tough on crime, especially juvenile crime. In a community weary of what they saw as youthful rebellion, this reputation was an asset. Parents fed up with their teenagers thanked him. School administrators praised his firm hand. Local newspapers celebrated the tough judge, who was finally teaching these kids a lesson. But behind the stern facade and the black robe, something else was happening. Mark Ciavarella had a partner in his endeavors, another judge named Michael Conahan. As the president judge of Luzerne County, Conahan held administrative power over the entire court system. Together, these two men were about to orchestrate one of the most brazen and morally bankrupt corruption schemes in American judicial history. Before delving into their methods, it is crucial to understand a key vulnerability in the juvenile justice system. Unlike the adult system, juvenile courts are theoretically designed for rehabilitation, not punishment. The proceedings are less formal, and in many states, including Pennsylvania at the time, children did not automatically have the right to an attorney. A child could be brought before a judge, charged with a crime, and sentenced, all without a lawyer present to defend them. This was deemed acceptable because juvenile court judges were expected to act in the best interest of the child, to be fair, compassionate, and to consider alternatives to incarceration. They were supposed to be guardians of justice. Mark Ciavarella, however, had different priorities. Between 2003 and 2008, his courtroom's conviction rate was double the state average. He sentenced children to detention centers at a rate nearly 3 times higher than judges in other Pennsylvania counties. His hearings were a blur, a shocking display of judicial efficiency. The average hearing in his courtroom lasted less than 3 minutes. Some were over in just 90 seconds. Imagine that. A child's entire future decided in less time than it takes to make a cup of coffee. Parents would later describe these hearings as assembly line justice. Children would be shuffled in, barely comprehending the charges against them, and shuffled out in handcuffs. Their devastated families were left standing in the hallway, dazed and confused, wondering what had just happened and where their child was being taken. But in the moment, they assumed this was just how the system worked. They thought, the judge must know what he's doing. These kids must have done something really bad. They hadn't. And the judge wasn't interested in justice. He was interested in money. The scheme unveiled, the mechanics of the scheme were as simple as they were infuriating. In 2002, a private company, owned by a businessman named Robert Miracle and developed by a man named Robert Powell, began building 2 for-profit juvenile detention facilities in Luzerne County, PA Child Care and Western PA Child Care. At the time, Luzerne County already had its own county-run juvenile detention center, a public facility that had served the area for years. But Judge Conahan, using his administrative authority, shut it down. He claimed it was too old, too expensive to maintain, that the county simply couldn't afford to keep it open. This was a lie. The county-run facility was actually less expensive per child than the new private prisons would be. But closing it served a singular, sinister purpose. It eliminated the competition and created a guaranteed customer base for the private facilities. With the public option gone, any child that Judge Ciavarella sentenced to detention had to go to one of these 2 private prisons. There was no alternative. This is where the money began to flow. Between 2003 and 2008, Miracle and Powell paid Judge Ciavarella and Judge Conahan $2.8 million in kickbacks. The money was meticulously laundered through a web of shell companies and fake consulting contracts to hide the paper trail. This vast sum amounted to an extra $280,000 a year for each judge, tax-free, on top of their judicial salaries. With his illicit earnings, Judge Ciavarella bought a $785,000 condominium in Florida, took lavish vacations, and lived like a king. All he had to do in return was keep the detention centers full. And so he did. Every child who came before him, no matter how minor their offense, was no longer a person in need of guidance, but a potential revenue stream. The more kids he locked up, the more money the detention centers made, and the more kickbacks he received. It was a perfect system of corruption, built on the shattered lives of children. The victims. To truly grasp the human cost of this greed, you must hear the stories of the children whose lives he destroyed. Charlie Balasavage was 17 years old when he appeared before Judge Ciavarella in 2005. His offense was getting into a fight with another student at school. Charlie had no prior record. He was a good student and an athlete. In any normal juvenile court, a first-time offender like him would likely have received probation, community service, or perhaps anger management counseling. Instead, Judge Ciavarella sentenced him to 90 days in detention. Charlie's mother, Sandy Fonzo, was stunned. She tried to speak, to ask questions, but she was silenced. Her son was handcuffed and led away. The entire hearing took less than 2 minutes. Charlie spent 3 months at PA childcare. When he came out, his mother said he was a different person. The boy who went in was gone. In his place was an angry, traumatized young man who had started using drugs while incarcerated, something he had never done before. His life spiraled. He got into more trouble and struggled with addiction. In 2010, at the age of 23, Charlie Balasavage died of a drug overdose. Years later, at Judge Ciavarella's sentencing hearing, Sandy Fonzo confronted the man who had ruined her family. Her raw grief and fury were captured by news cameras as she screamed at him in the courthouse hallway. "You ruined my life. My kid's not here anymore. He's gone. He shot himself in the heart, you scumbag." Charlie was just one victim. There were thousands more. Hillary Transue was the 15-year-old girl who, along with a friend, created a fake MySpace page mocking their assistant principal. It was a mean-spirited, foolish teenage prank. Her parents expected her to get school detention, maybe a suspension. Instead, she was charged with harassment and brought before Judge Ciavarella without an attorney. Her parents weren't even allowed in the courtroom. The judge asked if she made the page. She said yes. He asked if she was sorry. She said yes. He stared at her for a moment and then delivered his verdict. Adjudicated delinquent. 3 months. The entire hearing lasted 90 seconds. Hillary was handcuffed and taken away, leaving her parents in a state of shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. She later described her time in detention as deeply traumatizing. She was strip-searched, watched while she showered, and locked in a small room for 23 hours a day. For making a fake MySpace page, a 15-year-old girl was treated like a violent criminal. When she was finally released, she was devastated. She had missed 3 months of school, lost her spot on the gymnastics team, and found that her friends had moved on without her. She was left to battle depression and anxiety. Hillary, however, is one of the lucky ones. She survived. She channeled her trauma into advocacy, eventually testifying before Congress to help change the very system that had wronged her. Not every child was so fortunate. The sheer scope of Ciavarella's corruption is staggering when you look at the cases. A 15-year-old girl who stole a CD from Walmart was sentenced to 90 days. A 13-year-old boy who argued with his mother and threw a piece of steak at her during dinner was sent to detention. A 10-year-old boy who got into a schoolyard fight was sent to detention. A 14-year-old girl who shoplifted makeup worth less than $30 received 3 months. A 16-year-old boy caught with less than a gram of marijuana was sentenced to 6 months. These were not violent criminals who posed a danger to society. These were children making childish mistakes. The kind that should have been handled with a stern talking to, counseling, or community service. Instead, they were incarcerated in for-profit prisons because a judge was getting paid. The consequences extended far beyond the immediate trauma of detention. Children who were locked up dropped out of school at alarming rates. They developed severe mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and PTSD. They struggled to find jobs because they now had juvenile records. Their families were driven into debt trying to pay the fees associated with their incarceration. Some, like Charlie Balasavage, turned to drugs to cope. Others became violent, learning from older, more dangerous youths in the detention centers. Several attempted suicide. Some succeeded. Judge Ciavarella didn't just steal their freedom, he stole their futures. He took children who might have become teachers, engineers, parents, and artists and turned them into tragic statistics. And what made it all even more sinister was the very system designed to protect them became his shield. Because juvenile proceedings were often sealed to protect a child's privacy, parents and lawyers couldn't easily access the records. This veil of privacy became a weapon, allowing Judge Ciavarella to operate in the shadows. For years, nobody was watching. Nobody was asking questions. Until finally, someone did. The investigation and exposure came up. The scheme began to unravel in 2007, not because of a formal complaint against the juvenile court, but through an unrelated FBI investigation into corruption in Luzon County government contracts. Federal agents were looking into construction projects awarded to Robert Miracle, the same man who had built the private prisons. During this investigation, they discovered a series of unusual payments being made to judges, wire transfers and consulting fees moving through shell companies. The amounts were staggering and made no sense. Why would a private prison developer be paying massive sums to juvenile court judges? The FBI began digging deeper. They subpoenaed bank records, interviewed witnesses, and slowly started connecting the dots. In January 2009, the story exploded. The Wilkes-Barre Times leader broke the news. 2 Luzon County judges had accepted millions of dollars in kickbacks from private juvenile detention centers. The paper reported that thousands of children may have been wrongfully incarcerated. The community was horrified. Parents whose children had been sentenced by Ciavarella began coming forward, sharing their stories of lightning-fast hearings, the absence of legal representation, and the cruelly harsh sentences for minor offenses. Organizations like the Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia immediately got involved. Reviewing the cases, they uncovered a horrifying pattern. Nearly half of the thousands of children who appeared before Judge Ciavarella between 2003 and 2008 had no legal representation. Most didn't even know they had a right to an attorney. The sentences were outrageously severe. Children in Luzon County were 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than children in other Pennsylvania counties for the exact same offenses. The Juvenile Law Center filed motions to overturn the convictions, arguing that every single case heard by Judge Ciavarella was tainted by corruption. While the legal process began to move, the 2 judges were about to face federal charges. In February 2009, Judge Mark Ciavarella and Judge Michael Conahan were charged with multiple federal crimes, including honest services fraud, conspiracy, and tax evasion. They initially attempted to secure a plea deal that would have seen them serve just 7 years in prison, a slap on the wrist for ruining thousands of lives. But the presiding federal judge, Edwin Cossack, rejected the deal as too lenient, demanding a full accounting of their crimes. The case went to trial. Prosecutors meticulously laid out the scheme, presenting wire transfers, financial records, and testimony from witnesses. The builder, Robert Miracle, and the developer, Robert Powell, both cooperated, admitting they had paid the judges specifically to ensure the detention centers remained full. But the most powerful testimony came from the victims. One by one, young adults who were once children in Ciavarella's courtroom took the stand. They spoke of their trauma and how their lives had been derailed. Parents testified about the horror of watching their children being handcuffed and taken away for trivial misdeeds. Sandy Fonzo gave devastating testimony about her son Charlie's downward spiral and death. Hillary Transue described the humiliation and fear of being incarcerated for a MySpace joke. The jury listened, they saw the pattern, and they understood the profound scope of the betrayal. In 2011, they delivered their verdict, guilty. Judge Michael Conahan was sentenced to 17.5 years in federal prison. Judge Mark Ciavarella was sentenced to 28 years. At his sentencing, Ciavarella showed no remorse, insisting he had always acted in the best interest of the children. The federal judge didn't buy it. Your conduct is a tragic story of how greed and power can corrupt even those entrusted with the most sacred duty, to protect children. Judge Cossack stated, adding that Ciavarella had shown no repentance, no acceptance of responsibility, no sympathy for the victims. The man who had sent thousands of children to detention was finally going to prison himself. In the wake of the criminal convictions, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court took an unprecedented step. In 2009, it vacated every single juvenile conviction from Judge Ciavarella's courtroom between 2003 and 2008. Over 2,400 cases were thrown out, erased as if they never happened. The court essentially declared that because of the deep-seated corruption, not a single one of these convictions could be trusted. Every child deserved a clean slate. For many victims, this was life-changing. They could finally move forward without a juvenile record haunting them, allowing them to apply for jobs, attend college, and seek professional licenses. But erasing the conviction did not erase the trauma. These young people, now adults, still carried the scars. They still suffered from nightmares, anxiety, and depression. They still struggled to trust authority. Studies have shown that even short periods of juvenile incarceration can have lasting psychological damage, increasing the likelihood of dropping out of school, abusing substances, and ending up in the adult criminal justice system. Ciavarella didn't just incarcerate these kids. He damaged them, some permanently. The criminal cases were only the beginning. The victims and their families filed multiple civil lawsuits against the judges, the private prison companies, and others involved, alleging civil rights violations and false imprisonment. After years of legal battles, settlements were reached. Robert Miracle, the builder, agreed to pay $17.75 million, and in 2022, the private prison companies paid an additional $4.75 million. In total, victims received over $22 million. While a substantial sum, when divided among hundreds of victims, it amounted to tens of thousands of dollars per person. Can you put a price on a stolen childhood? On years of trauma and a future derailed? The money helped, but it could not fix what was broken. The scandal was immortalized in the 2014 documentary, Kids for Cash, which brought national attention to the case and sparked urgent conversations about juvenile justice reform. Some good did come from the tragedy. Pennsylvania changed its laws to ensure that all children have access to an attorney and that parents are allowed in the courtroom. Oversight of juvenile court judges was increased. Nationally, the scandal became a rallying cry against for-profit prisons and harsh juvenile sentencing. Several states have since banned for-profit juvenile facilities or implemented strict regulations. But the uncomfortable truth remains: the systemic problems that allowed this to happen still exist in many places. For-profit prisons still operate. Judges still wield enormous discretion. Poor families still struggle to afford legal representation. And children, particularly children of color and those from low-income families, are still funneled into the criminal justice system at alarming rates. The Kids for Cash scandal was an extreme example, but it was a symptom of a much larger disease. As of today, both judges are serving their sentences. Michael Conahan was released to home confinement in 2020 due to COVID-19 concerns. Mark Ciavarella remains in federal prison, not eligible for release until 2035, when he will be 85 years old. He continues to maintain his innocence. The victims are still healing. Some have become powerful advocates, working to ensure what happened to them never happens to anyone else. Others continue to struggle with addiction and the psychological wounds inflicted upon them as children. And some, like Charlie Balasavage, are gone, the ultimate victims of a system that valued profit over people. The Kids for Cash scandal teaches us a number of hard lessons. It shows that corruption can fester in the very institutions we trust most, and that oversight and transparency are not luxuries, but necessities. It demonstrates that the profit motive has no place in the justice system, because when freedom becomes a commodity, the entire system is corrupted. Most importantly, it reminds us that children are incredibly vulnerable and that it is our collective duty to protect them. We must remain vigilant, ask questions, and demand accountability, because justice should never be for sale.